Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We are on to the second week of December here in 2023, working our way towards a Peach Bowl matchup between the Penn State Nittany Lions, ranked 10th in the final college football playoff rankings, against Ole Miss Rebels, ranked 11th. Both of those teams searching for their 11th victory. We did actually have a Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl press conference take place on Monday morning in Beaver Stadium. We'll dive into that a little bit with Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. We'll also talk about some players to monitor on the practice field as Penn State gets ready to begin its preparation on the field. And we're going to get a chance to see some practice action on Friday. We'll review players on offense and on defense who stand to make a strong impression here with the final weeks of work before this team plays its 13th matchup. But first, we begin with an addition for the 2024 Nittany Lions roster. We're just about a week away from the early signing period in college football, when we'll see a couple dozen high school seniors put pen to paper and firm up their plans with the Nittany Lions. But as we covered in our most recent episode of this podcast, the transfer portal period is open and upon us in a significant way, and Penn State claiming its first commitment out of this portal cycle in the form of Division II offensive tackle Alan Herron. It's a name that we covered in the past here on the show with Tyler Calvaruso. We'll do that right now once again. Tyler, welcome back into the podcast. And I know you've been a busy man. We've been waiting for that first committed name to surface. And it seemed like heading into last weekend with Alan Herron coming to Happy Valley that this was a guy, a name in play to be that first pickup.
Yeah, he was one of the first targets to emerge for Penn State, really in portal season overall, given when his offer went out. He was one of those early entrants into the portal as a Division II guy. You know, those guys could officially get their name out there and in the portal a little bit earlier. And there were a lot of schools in on him. You know, he received, I believe it was 20-plus offers throughout the course of his brief portal recruitment. Penn State wasn't one of the first, but when it did jump in, it was one that was caught his eye pretty quickly. And the Nittany Lions get him to campus for an official visit after he made it to Texas Tech the previous weekend. Clemson was on the docket for Alan Herron this upcoming weekend. He was supposed to make it down there for an official visit. But when he gets to Penn State, things just go well between him and offensive line coach Phil Charlwain, and he feels so at home where he feels the need to bring an end to his portal recruitment and commit to the Nittany Lions. It was definitely a big win from Penn State on the timing front, because I had conversations with people who indicated that Clemson felt really good about where he was at with Herron, and it felt like that official visit could have been closing time for the staff down there. And, you know, Penn State obviously got this done in a manner to where he won't be making it to that Clemson official visit. So that's a pretty big aspect of this, in my opinion. And then you have Herron as a player. You know, he played in a Division II program where, I mean, the competition was what it was. You know, he was oftentimes the biggest player on the field by a pretty significant margin at that, and that allowed him to dominate. But the athleticism is there, the upside is there. The general consensus, you know, seems to be that this is an upside play for Penn State. You know, he might not necessarily be a plug-and-play guy, but that's perfectly fine. That wasn't a deterrent for any program involved in Herron's portal recruitment. It definitely wasn't a deterrent for Penn State. He has 3 years to play too, and he's going to be getting to campus in January. He's going to be enrolling for that spring semester, so that's a big deal. He's going to be able to get to work with Chuck Losey early on, and yeah, he's 6'5", 310. The wingspan's where it needs to be. I've had people mention NFL draft potential if he gets coached up correctly. Penn State's pretty confident in its ability to do so. So that's kind of covering all the bases on this get, and obviously, you know, it's a key get for just the overall offensive line equation when it comes to 2024. You know, there are spots up for grabs, you know, with guys either not coming back or off to the NFL. There are young guys in the room. There's a lot of talent in the room. The majority of it seems to be young at this point. So you add Herron into the mix, another high upside guy who, you know, maybe he gets to campus and he comes along quick, even quicker than a lot of people think he will. That's not, you know, out of the cards either. But overall, this is a really quality get for Penn State out of the portal. I think it kicked off portal season in a pretty impressive manner.
And remember, these roster additions are about to happen in a month. Just next month, we're going to see these guys make the move. Luke Reynolds, the nation's #1 tight end prospect, was on with us a couple episodes ago. He's going to be part of those freshmen showing up to campus. And now here is Herron, the first confirmed transfer that will be joining the team in January. Remember, we also have seen transfers join the program in past years in May, come summer. And you know, Chop Robinson is a guy who wasn't on campus for spring ball. certainly didn't stop him from making an impact. Dante Cephas wasn't on campus this year for spring ball. You wonder what maybe his first year on campus might have looked like if he had those 15 practice sessions under his belt before he got to the summer. In the case of Herron, as you addressed, offensive tackle is an area that they're going to add to from the freshman class, but not necessarily with guys that we think are going to be ready for Big Ten ball in 2024. So what do you have coming back? The big question there is whether Caden Wallace takes that 6th year with that COVID eligibility. If he does, then all of a sudden your problem, a potential problem, is solved at right tackle. You've got a guy with 4 years of experience there, coming off easily his best year of experience. If Caden Wallace says, I'm off to the NFL, I'm going to try to make some money and make my name in professional football, then you're without your 2 starting tackles from the last couple of seasons, because Olu Fashanu, I don't think a miracle is coming for Penn State to keep him here at left tackle. So he moves on, and you've got Drew Shelton with starting experience on the left side, more than 300 total snaps accrued between the right and left side for him this year. You factor in Herron, it feels like at the least here, Tyler, considering the investment of a scholarship and the aggressive pursuit by Penn State, you'd like him to be a 2-deep factor when you close up shop next August. You want him to be, I think, in that conversation. If he's not a starter, he's a guy that you feel like can step in and play Power 5 football for you come next September. And we have seen a little bit of a different process for guys who have come in after a couple of years of college experience. JB Nelson comes to mind. He was a starter this year, but last year they kept him under 5 games. He took a red shirt. So it is worth noting, as you said, 3 years to play those 2 seasons. But in my mind, even if Javen Williams and Chimdi Ono take steps forward and one or both of those guys is ready to hit the practice field next August as a starting caliber contender, that still leaves you, I think, a couple names short, a couple bodies short. So one of them, I think you fill in with Alan Herron. JB Nelson may be a name to know because he has tackle experience at the junior college level. That is something that he has still gotten some work at, though secondarily because his focus has been on guard. So as we monitor things here, does that leave room for another addition at the offensive tackle spot if Penn State can find the right fit? And in that instance, do you think there'll be more of a priority on getting a guy who is ready for the short term rather than what seems like a multi-year investment with Alan Herron, who comes from that Division II level at a shorter university down in Georgia?
You know, a more experienced tackle would kind of be the point of emphasis if Penn State does go on to make another addition at the position. And it's definitely possible. You know, they're still in the mix with Chase Bisson. This is Texas A&M transfer who started 12 games. Yeah, I believe it was 12 games at, guess what, right tackle for A&M. And he was a highly impactful player while doing so. You know, he was definitely not a turnstile on that Texas A&M offensive line. He was a freshman All-American. That kid can play. And, you know, there's a reason why his portal recruitment is as hot as it has been since he got in there. I mean, every program that needs an offensive lineman, just pretty much every program in the nation, is on him. Penn State's one of them. You know, Penn State has that in with Troutland and Bison's relationship going back to when he was at Don Bosco in North Jersey. I mean, those two like each other. Bison's is fond of him. So that's a plus for Penn State. But again, it's a highly competitive recruitment. But let's be clear, you know, Alan Herron being committed does not take Penn State out of that pursuit or any other pursuit, for that matter. You know, they're definitely evaluating and exploring other opportunities or potential opportunities on the offensive line as well. We're going to have to see what comes about on that front. But Bisontis is the name that has been generating the buzz really since he hit the portal. You know, we already mentioned the previous ties and just the overall talent level. If you can add a guy like that to your offensive line depth chart, I mean, he's an instant plug and play guy, and he kind of completely changes the conversation surrounding Penn State's offensive line in 2024 if they were to get him, because you have not only just a right tackle that you're really confident in, he has a track record of going out and producing. And when it comes to getting guys out of the portal, if a guy can produce at a high level in a Power 5 program, you really can't beat that.
This time of year also, I feel like because of the transfer portal and the urgency that shows up and the importance of previous relationships, what kind of reputation has Phil Trautwein developed at Penn State at this point? I know you got into the beat here a little bit into the process, but you got in at the right time in terms of his trajectory, because last year, big step forward for the offensive line on the field. They bring in a big class with highly rated players, including a 5-star last winter. And now here we are. They're about to bring in another large class, figuratively and literally. They're getting early success for a guy who was pretty coveted, about to make the jump up to Power 5 football, and Herron. It just seems like Phil Trautwein, Penn State generally, they're getting more of what they desire. out there from offensive line pursuits than they probably had in the past.
I think you're kind of reached the point of Troutwin's tenure at Penn State where the guys in the offensive line room are exactly what he is looking for in terms of, body type, skill set, athleticism, upside. I feel like he's gotten to the point in his recruiting where, he's kind of been let loose on the trail. If he likes a guy, he's got full green light to go and get him. And he's always been, because I got a look at him when I was covering Boston College when he was the Boston College offensive line coach. And he was in a position where, he had to do more with less. Sometimes Boston College was recruiting, lower ranked guys, and he had to coach them up. And he did a pretty damn good job of doing so. So the coaching chops are definitely there. I think that's something that guys in the portal specifically see, because we always talk about, we've said it a bunch this offseason, the priorities are different when you're a portal recruit as opposed to a high school recruit. When you're a portal guy, you're really zoned in on which offensive line coach is the best fit for you, which offensive line coach can help you get to the next level, and which offensive line coach, really has experience tooling up a guy with your specific skill set. And I think guys can look at Phil Trautwein and what he has accomplished, recently and throughout his career as an offensive line coach and say, hey, look, if I go to that guy, he could get me to where I need to be. He could potentially get me to the next level. He could get me to be a high-level performer in the Big Ten. So I think that is, some of the feedback that we receive regarding his status and how he's perceived by prospects with the portal. I think Penn State's offensive line recruiting has been in a pretty good place recently, and he's obviously a huge reason why. Frank Leonard deserves some credit for that as well. Those two work really, really well together. It's a good dynamic there between those two.
Been a tremendous addition for James Franklin. I know aside from someone that he really personally counts on in his day-to-day, and Frank Leonard, James Franklin really found someone that Phil Trautwein has meshed so well with. And they had history, of course. It wasn't like trying to put two pieces together that didn't have any history or track record. But we've seen it on the camp field with Penn State players dealing with. We've seen it with Penn State prospects and their kind of interaction with those two. Just play so well off of each other. Looking over at wide receiver, because beyond the offensive tackle spot, this has, of course, been the priority position that you and I have previewed and kind of worked our way through the process with. And the latest part of that process for us on the podcast was last Friday. Julian Fleming was a name of conversation there. So was Donovan McCulley out of Indiana. And also Andre Green, the North Carolina transfer. Another name that popped up was Jalen Lucas on campus. So I don't know where you want to start, but I know probably most of our listeners would prefer with Fleming. So what's the latest on his search for the second college fit in his career and in a fifth year at the college level, and Penn State's role in that?
Penn State's still very much in that race, as it has been really since he hit the portal. He's going to be heading to Nebraska for a visit, so that's another opportunity he's going to explore. The potential for a reunion with Kyle McCord down in Lincoln is on the table. Kentucky is still kind of being tossed around a little bit. I heard of a visit's going to happen there. It would probably happen this week. I think that, once that Nebraska visit plays out, assuming it does indeed play out, our Chris Homer did a great job reporting that over the weekend that he was going to be making it to Nebraska for that visit. And, sometimes plans change and he doesn't make it, but I do believe he's going to be down there. So
let's put it out there. It's supposed to be a Tuesday visit.
Yeah.
We're recording at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on a Tuesday. So things may be in flux a little bit, but it's interesting to see the quarterback wide receiver tandem there. A couple guys who are from the same region, certainly have shared ups and downs together in Columbus, now poking their head into the same campus within a 24-hour span. That's interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely notable. And Nebraska just has a lot of buzz overall on the recruiting trail right now with everything going on with Dylan Raiola, the top-ranked quarterback in 2024 class. Huskers have a chance to flip him. So they have a lot going in their favor down there right now. But there's still, we continue to hear really what we've been saying. There are still people close to Fleming who would prefer he uses his final year of eligibility to return home to Pennsylvania and play at Penn State. I think he still has a high level of interest in Penn State, and I think he has a high level of interest in Nebraska. So I feel like I think you really just said it best. It's kind of in flux right now because you want to see how this visit plays out. It's kind of difficult to speculate where things are, on the right before a visit is about to start because you don't know what's going to happen while he's in town there. But really, just from what we've heard, it's been consistent with Fleming's level of interest in Penn State and Penn State's level of interest in Fleming. So we're just going to see how that Nebraska visit plays out. But Penn State's still very much in the picture. It hasn't faded in the slightest or anything like that.
And I think if you're Penn State and you want Fleming, you want him all in, and you don't want Fleming maybe feel like he shortchanged himself. And you want, if he needs to go see another school, go do it. It's his last chance. he's got 1 year to maximize this and kind of validate a lot of that 5-star buzz that followed him out of high school here in the state of Pennsylvania. And certainly in that wide receiver room in Ohio State, it's a different beast. But if he can separate himself at a different school here as a fifth-year senior, it could really jump his stock for the next level. And you'd understand why he wants to make sure he gets this decision right. But Penn State's not going to wait around here. They need to get things done at wide receiver. Their position coach wants to add new pieces. They got an offensive coordinator on campus now, and Andy Kotelnicki, who wants to get to work putting together his vision with pieces that can accomplish it. So let's go with the two guys who are on campus here this past weekend. The first of which we discussed a bit last Friday because it was confirmed. Andre Green spent his first couple of college seasons at North Carolina, did not get much in the way of game work along the way. Where is he with his process, and what did Penn State gain from this past weekend?
He's still going to make it into Virginia for an official visit this upcoming weekend, but Penn State feels pretty good about what it accomplished with Green while he was on campus for his official visit. I mean, he spoke glowingly of the Penn State staff. Our Brian Doan got the chance to catch up with him, and he had praise for multiple members of the staff, James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki, Marcus Hagan. So there was a lot to like from that perspective for him. It seems like he's very comfortable with Penn State as a school. It seems like he's comfortable with the facilities and the campus, so that's a plus. And there's been a lot of optimism coming from the Penn State side. So he is still going to go on to Virginia, and Virginia has prioritized Green heavily. Really the moment he hit the portal, I touched on it last week that Tony Elliott was in home to check in with him and make that visit. So that kind of speaks to where he's at on Virginia's transfer portal board. So that's going to be an interesting official visit playing out. There are other programs involved as well. Florida, Tennessee, pair of SEC programs. Wisconsin's involved as well. So this one's not done, but there's been plenty of optimism, especially from the Penn State side, coming out of his visit. And, Green, he wasn't productive at North Carolina. He only had 5 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown in 2 years with the Tar Heels. And, the production might not be there, but Penn State staff feels the upside is. He's athletic. He's got an impressive frame. He's, a bigger body on the outside. So I think that's the point of intrigue. And it's kind of like what we just said when it comes to offensive line. Given the fact that Penn State is in a position to add multiple receivers in the portal this offseason, maybe you could take a gamble on a guy like Green, who still has, a little bit of developing to do, might still be a little bit raw. Not every guy you go out and get has to be an instant impact guy. Does Penn State need one of those guys that were wide receiver? Yeah, probably. That's kind of where a guy like Fleming comes in. It's where more of a Donovan McCulley or Jamori Macklin comes in. Players of those ilk who have a little bit more experience and track record of production under their belt. But there is room for a guy like Green who, he has the tools. And the staff feels he could be developed with Marcus Hagan. But overall sentiment is there's positivity coming out of that visit.
Yeah, Green's just 2 years removed from being prospect number 102 in the top 24/7 for that 2022 class. So big time blue chipper coming in. North Carolina had a lot of production from that passing game. He was not a part of it, but Penn State certainly seen something going back a couple of years, and then now updating its outlook toward Green that they believe it can maybe help them out. And so Green, one to monitor moving forward. As we said, Jalen Lucas was one of the 2 offensive players from the 2023 Indiana Hoosier squad that picked up early Penn State offers in the portal. The other, Donovan McCulley. Lucas, we've described not so much just as put him in that receiver column. It's been more of a jack of all trades, special teams returner. He can line up in a few different areas for you. And one thing we said about Andy Kotelnicki, he wants to maximize his personnel and play to the strengths. And Lucas seems to be a guy who has some versatility in those strengths. So what did you make of this visit popping up during the weekend and Penn State's pursuit of Lucas, who's also been a pretty popular target?
I think obviously Penn State pushed to get him on campus for this visit, and it did so for any other program, so that's a plus. I think, he's in a little bit more of a different situation than kind of some of the other portal pursuits, given who he is as a player and, his potential utilization at Penn State. He's one of those, Swiss Army knife guys who can move around in your scheme. He can line up at running back and catch passes out of the backfield. He can play in the slot, and you motion him off for jet sweeps. You get him the ball underneath. You get him the ball in space. Let him make plays. So there's, potential there for a nice weapon in Andy Kotelnicki's system. Then obviously what he brings as a kick returner. I mean, he was an All-American kick returner in 2022. He's one of those guys who was just downright explosive with the ball in his hands. We've heard the visit went well, but it doesn't seem like he's really in a rush to get things done. I think he's going to get out, see some other schools. But I think Penn State's doing well with Lucas right now. Again, they pushed him to get him on campus this weekend first before anyone else for a reason that came to fruition. And it seems like things went well there. But again, his situation is just a little bit different in terms of, prioritization and just because he doesn't have necessarily a true position. He's one of those guys you can move around. There's a lot of value in that in Penn State's new offense, but Penn State's still figuring things out at certain positions. So Lucas is the guy he's gonna remain in the conversation. We're gonna have to see which other schools that he checks out as well.
Anything new on McCauley, considering he's a guy who has flashed that big play potential with in Big Ten games against Penn State? Is he somebody that remains on that radar, or does day by day go by, and the more it doesn't work its way toward Penn State, you have to assume it's working its way away from Penn State?
Oh, he's definitely remains on that radar, and the staff's going to keep working to get him back, or not back. Well, yeah, technically back since he played in State College this year. So we would be getting him back to town for a visit. And, last week, on Friday, when we talked about him, really all I had been hearing was Michigan buzz. He made it to Kentucky for a visit over the weekend, so that's a point of intrigue in that recruitment. But I did some asking around on him over the weekend. I still heard plenty of Michigan, but I had one source, a good source, tell me that, Penn State's up there on McCauley's list as well. So the potential for a visit definitely remains in place. And, when it comes to instant impact guys, potential instant impact guys for 2024, and guys with proven track records at the Power 5 level, McCauley might be the top guy on Penn State's portal board at wide receiver. There's really a lot to like with him. The production at Indiana was there this past season. The athleticism is there. The size is there. 6'5", 200. You're talking about Penn State's having a type and, having a desire for big bodies on the outside. That's what Donovan McCauley is. Staff really, really likes him. They're going to continue to work on getting that visit in place. And that's a key point in this recruitment because, we could hear that he likes Penn State and likes, the offense and what the staff might have to offer. But until he gets to campus for a visit, we can't really gauge that. You got to see how that visit plays out. So getting him to town, it's going to be paramount in this situation for Penn State.
Am I talking out of turn to suggest that Penn State could conceivably think about adding 3 transfer receivers? Is that just too much to ask? I know we have other movement to take place here on campus. Christian Driver is the only name in the portal from the current wide receiver unit here at Penn State. But we're mentioning a lot of names. We talked about some of the versatility that Lucas brings beyond the wide receiver position. Is 2 the number? Is 3 a possibility?
I guess 3 is a possibility based on, other attrition at the position. We're going to have to see what happens, coming out of the Peach Bowl if, whoever decides to leave. We're just going to have to see what happens on that front. There's going to be a second wave of portal guys as there always is. So you have to see what pops up on that front. I've heard multiple additions at wide receiver throughout the offseason. So we're really just going to have to see whether that's 2 or 3. We're going to have to see what comes about. But Penn State's involved with a bunch of high-quality wideouts, guys who I think can help the room in 2024. And obviously, Penn State wants to get more explosive at the position, and I don't think they're going to say no to guys who they think can help them accomplish that.
Yeah, a lot more to learn about this receiver room. We're still waiting to see if Harrison Wallace is going to reappear for a little late season action. Keandre Lambert-Smith has that COVID eligibility in play, and then a bunch of younger components within this roster that we're just not sure what to make of their future here in Happy Valley. That'll all get figured out in the next month. A lot more will get figured out in the transfer portal. Tyler Calvaruso, we appreciate your perspective on it. We had some recruiting stuff we might get to, but I think we can leave it here. We did a lot more on the transfer portal today than I anticipated. I think it was for good reason. So thank you for that, and plenty of coverage for our VIP subscribers over at Lions247.com.
A lot more to come. Appreciate you having me back on, man.
All right. Let's shift gears and look toward the current Penn State program. And they got a lot coming their way to campus in the form of January enrollees. But before then, they've got something they're looking to accomplish in picking up an 11th win that would lock them in as a top 10 team here in 2023. December 30th down in Atlanta in the Peach Bowl against number 11 Ole Miss, and bringing Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan now to the Lions 24/7 podcast. I was alongside these guys early Monday morning. I think it's the earliest press conference I've attended at Beaver Stadium. We had a 9 a.m. session with James Franklin, Pat Kraft, the athletic director here at Penn State, and then the president of the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. So a lot to work our way through from 30 minutes. Plenty of it was, build up for the game itself, and I don't think we necessarily need to touch on that. But Mark, at the forefront of it, I just felt like the relationship between Pat Kraft and James Franklin was out there on public display for all of us to kind of soak in. We shared the room with those two, and I was feeling the love between Franklin and Kraft up there.
Yeah, I mean, when Kraft said he's the best coach in college football. I'm paraphrasing. I forget exactly what the words were, but that was the essence of what he was saying. I think that tells you everything that you need to know. But I also think you hit on something else. It's the relationship. I mean, you could tell the way. What I like is, I think you truly like somebody when you can bust their whats. You know what I mean? And between those two guys, they could get after one another in a good-natured way. Franklin, I thought it was pretty funny because we've seen Kraft on the sideline at games and Franklin joking. I think he was joking. I have to go back and look that he was flagged 5 times for going on the field at Temple in BC. That was pretty good. I'm anxious to see James like at a camp or something where I could say, did you just ad-lib that? Because that was a really good line. And then, Kraft saying, how come nobody's putting my name in for DC? But, I thought Seth Engel asked a really good question. He phrased it as we talked about it, the alignment last week or a couple weeks ago. I forget exactly when we said it, but, James has talked over and over this year about the alignment, and all of the joking aside, I think you could see that there where they're kind of on the same page. And Kraft essentially said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, that he wants to give his head coaches, whether it's football, whatever, the tools they need to succeed. And I don't think we have to read too far between the lines to think that Franklin didn't believe he had that before this regime, before this AD, before this president. So while there was some joking in there, I think there was also some seriousness in that they're going to do whatever it takes to compete at that level. And I mentioned it before, James is now in a situation where he's getting what he wants. And now it's time to see that translate onto the field, not necessarily in this particular game, but moving forward and to prove that you are one of the better teams in the nation.
Daniel, if I recall correctly, your first assignment with us here at Lions 24/7 was Pat Kraft's introductory press conference. And a year and a half later, there he is with, no offense to anyone else, but his most important head coach for financial reasons in the entire department, James Franklin. They just went big game hunting, and they found themselves a very much lauded offensive coordinator in Andy Kotelnicki. Now they're out looking for their next defensive coordinator. Maybe that's internal. External options are on the table as well, as James Franklin referenced. What did you kind of take away from seeing those two guys? As James Franklin mentioned, throwing some jabs at each other, but ultimately kind of putting that alignment on the table quite literally as we were breaking down the Peach Bowl and a lot more.
It was a little bit of a different setting than I think we experience either of them. And we're not around either of them in that sort of setting together a lot of the times. But Monday morning was a lot more, I think, ceremonial in terms of something that is really meant to be an information gathering session. I think that we have our bowl media day later this week. So I think we'll circle back to some questions. And Franklin, I think, to a question about how they're handling some defensive coordinator stuff, said that he can get into that more when we meet again later. Hopefully that means we'll get more on Friday. But I think that it was something a little bit different to see both of them. And I thought that it was just kind of funny to see them, start to go after each other, be funny, make fun of each other to a certain extent, because so often those settings are very serious. And when we talk to Pat Kraft, it's a couple times a year, and it's these sort of big picture things about how's NIL, what are the Beaver Stadium renovations, questions that cover millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, when you really get down to it. But to kind of see them in that environment, talking about the Peach Bowl, it was fun. It's always nice to see a different side of these people, especially someone like Kraft, who we only really see on the sideline in passing in these couple of media environments every year. So it was kind of goofy, kind of fun, and some of us got a good Chick-fil-A breakfast out of it.
That's right. And naturally, the first question that came from the media, and it came from our Mark Brennan, shifted over to that defensive coordinator situation, framing it within the context of a Peach Bowl press conference. And Playing along those lines, at least what does it mean in the immediacy as they prepare for a matchup against one of the better offenses out of the SEC, which is, now about 2.5, less than 3 weeks away from this matchup. Daniel, you had the story up for us at lions247.com about as much as we got from Franklin in this setting about the coaching search, but more about how their approach is getting ready for the Rebels.
Yeah, and it's in terms of the Peach Bowl, it's pretty similar to kind of what we heard from James Franklin after they fired Mike Yurcich, where yesterday he said that they're going to handle things internally, and we didn't get much more than that. We didn't get the official, like, Anthony Poindexter will be the interim defensive coordinator or something like that. So maybe we'll get a little bit more clarity on that later this week. But he said that overall they'll handle the defense kind of like how they handled the offense. I think that means a lot of collaboration, moving some different pieces around, putting some people in different roles. They're going to have an extra headset to fill, all of those sorts of things. So I think maybe Friday we can get a little bit more clarity from James Franklin. I'm sure once we get down to Atlanta, we can get even more in terms of how things are going, in terms of the preparation for the Peach Bowl. But James Franklin also talked about the vacancy overall, and he called it an attractive opening. Didn't really get into it too much, but he made sure to point out that the last two coaches that have held that job have moved on to become head coaches somewhere. And I think that's something too that feeds into why there should and could be a lot of interest in this spot.
He also talked about history at the defensive coordinator position, and I thought he was going to. He did eventually get there. Penn State's history on the defensive side of the football, and obviously the legendary figures they've had there. But he was talking about his run as a head coach, 13 years now. And you go back to Vanderbilt, and he referenced 3 different defensive coordinators have achieved top 10 defenses under his watch. And we saw Brent Pry have some consistency. Certainly, more recently, Manny Diaz with an elite showing here in 2023. But it is a position that considering what they are going to be willing, what we gather, to offer up financially, and what they're offering up from a personnel standpoint, there's not a lot of locker rooms that you're going to walk into as a defensive coordinator and get those keys and all of a sudden have these kind of players at your disposal, even with some of the talent they're losing. On that subject, Mark Brennan, we've got opt-outs underway across college football. We've got one impacting Penn State that we addressed last week in Chop Robinson, finishing off his college career and turning his focus to the 2024 NFL draft. And by the way, he continues to show up on first round projections. So it seems like a validated choice there. But one of those, not opt-outs, but one of those announcements here in December that kept the guy in play for the Peach Bowl was Theo Johnson. It came on Friday. He put it out there that he's going to be going to the 2024 NFL draft, chasing those dreams, but he wants to play in the Peach Bowl with his teammates. And I'm paraphrasing his message, but this is exactly what we heard from several players last year, Mark, leading up to the Rose Bowl, another New Year's Six matchup. And we were wondering what kind of vibes we would get. Those vibes or 2021 Outback Bowl vibes when everyone was like, peace out, good luck, I'm going to go focus on myself. It is what it is. And you understand that not all teams are going to be the same, but I thought Theo Johnson's announcement maybe could be a trendsetter. And if it is, that bodes very well for a matchup that's going to be a spotlight opportunity for this team in a few weeks.
Yeah, as we record this on Tuesday, we want to put the disclaimer in because the last thing we want to happen is, but you know what I would tell you guys is that I think outside of Olu, I think everybody's still has things that they can prove and still has areas where they could improve. I mean, Chop, I think, is going to be has a really good chance of being a first rounder. I'm not sure how much more he was going to prove, but Kalen King preseason, everybody thought he was going to be a surefire first rounder. And, in the biggest game, he didn't play his biggest game. So this is one more chance if he decides to play to go out and show what he can do. But everybody else, you've drawn a very good SEC team, and it looks like it's going to be an SEC team that has most of its players as well. So, when Franklin said there is an opportunity for these players to show value, he's right. I mean, had they drawn Liberty, I don't know how many of these guys would have decided to stay. And I keep going back to this, and I can't get definitive answers, and it's something that maybe we can get at Media Day, but I wonder how many of these guys have some sort of bowl participation built into their NIL deals, because I know some of them do. I don't know exactly who, but I know that they're in play. I've been told that they're in play. Now, what does bowl participation mean? Show up, whatever. But I also think it was interesting that Franklin talked about Saquon Barkley and the way they handled him in the Fiesta Bowl, where they obviously limited what he did in practice and were able to kind of take it easy on him in that game. Now, it helps when you had Miles Sanders as his understudy, and I think everybody in the program realized how good he was, that it wasn't going to be, falling off a cliff. But I think all those things are in play, and I really do believe that when you look at these guys who are draft eligible or who may declare for the draft, I just think they still have things that they can prove. And I think this is going to be a good stage on which to prove it. Another NFL stadium, this is from what everybody has told us, including Gary Stokan, the CEO. This is one of the best bowl experiences for players. Hopefully it's one of the best for the media too, in a selfish way. But I think there's all that in play. And then, going back to, it's great, for the team vibe and leadership and all that stuff. But I think these guys are all practical enough to realize that if it's not going to benefit them, and that's completely understandable. I'm not saying this in a negative way. I think if they can get something out of it, why not go and do it? And I think most of these guys can.
And I think it's worth noting here that Ole Miss's perspective seems to be that this is their third biggest opponent of the season behind Georgia and Alabama. And I think Penn State's consensus perspective is really this is the third biggest opponent of the season behind Michigan and Ohio State. And both of those teams lost those games. Iowa deserves a ton of respect defensively, but they showed up to Beaver Stadium with half of a team essentially for that matchup. So I think Ole Miss and if they avoid a rash of opt-outs, it seems like they will, they're going to be more game for a matchup here. And so I think there's something to be gained overall. And for the players, I mean, Kalen King's a great example, a guy who finished as a second-team all-conference pick. Preseason, you're talking about, defensive back of the year in the conference with a guy like Kalen King. And across the board, though, Daniel, I mean, you think about Olu Fashanu being the guy who could step away right now. He could have stepped away last year, and people would understand why. But the closer we get to this thing and we don't hear from Olu, it's going to lead you to wonder or to anticipate, especially if we see him at practice on Friday as the first team left tackle and going through the normal stuff we see on the practice field, that it is trending towards a Saquon Barkley situation. James Franklin made the joke. He was a potential number one draft pick when he was getting ready for the bowl, and he slid all the way to number 2 in that draft to the New York Giants. And in that matchup, after an adjusted practice period for the postseason that suited Barkley well, 18 carries, 137 yards. He had a 92-yard touchdown against Washington. I don't know if he doesn't play in that game, if he falls to 3, 4, 5, 6. I have no idea. But there is something to be gained here. Ole Miss, one of the strengths of their team is their edge rushing trio. I don't know if Olu needs help going from number 8 in the draft to number 4 in the draft, but there's opportunities out there. And I think it probably more impacts a lot of these players like a Johnny Dixon, like a Curtis Jacobs, like a Theo Johnson, who right now you're just not quite sure what their draft profile is. And it's going to be learned as we put the pieces together between now and the combine and stuff. But Daniel, who are you looking at among maybe that James Franklin's referencing there and saying there's value here for guys before they totally turn the page?
Well, first of all, you talk about guys making their decisions and when they're going to do it. I think we have to applaud Theo and Chop for making their announcements during normal business hours, which is something that we haven't always seen. But I think that the way that things are, the fact that it's been so quiet, I think it'll be similar to last year where it was like those 3 or 4 days before the bowl game, and right before they went out there, that guys started to officially make those decisions. But we'll have to wait and see. But I do think that there are guys that can benefit from this. I think James Franklin bringing up Saquon Barkley is probably a little calculated by him. I think that on the one hand, it's he shows you that they'll take care of you and they'll look out for you. But on the other hand, it's, hey, if playing in a bowl game is good enough for Saquon Barkley, it's probably good enough for you. I think that might be some of the subtext there. But you talk about Kalen King and Johnny Dixon. I mean, Ole Miss's top wide receiver, Trey Harris, announced he's coming back to the team next year, so he'll be playing. He averaged more than 18 yards a catch this year for the Rebels. I think He had a big game against Texas A&M with 11 catches for more than 200 yards. So there's going to be talent out there, and there's going to be some one-on-one matchups for someone like Kalen King to really go out and prove himself. But I think that when you talk about this Penn State team and the draft class, it's there is an elite player like Olu. Chop Robinson, I think, falls into that elite prospect category too, with where he's projected to go. But I think they have a lot of guys who are sort of in that maybe late day 3, or not late day 3, late day 2, early day 3, where if you come out and you put your best foot forward and you really put it together in the bowl game and springboard it into the draft process, you can go from maybe late in the 3rd round to late in the 2nd round. You can go off of day 3 on to day 2. I think that Penn State, there's a ton of draft prospects on this team, but they're all in that kind of very solid category, like Johnny Dixon, Adisa Isaac, Theo Johnson, Hunter Norzad. Those are the guys that kind of strike me as very, Curtis Jacobs too, as very solid. They have NFL futures, but maybe they might have to wait a little bit. But someone like Adisa, he's played his way, I think, really like further up draft boards. I think CBS Sports has him as their number 108 prospect, number 13 edge. That's a premium position. He can potentially make himself some money. I think that there's a lot of these guys that can use this. This is going to be their final opportunity to put game tape together. If they do decide to leave, and I think that they can really, really use things use this as a springboard into the draft process. So I do think there is some value into it. I mean, some of that is also James Franklin's spin because he wants to win, and he's not worried about the draft process for himself. He wants that 11th win. He wants that Peach Bowl. He wants a springboard into the off season with a victory. But I think that for a lot of these guys that there is a good opportunity. And I think that Franklin has kind of shown these past couple of years that if you play, they'll take care of you and they'll make things work for you.
3 guys came to mind from last year's December process and what they did in the Rose Bowl, where they went in the draft. Jair Brown, who told us last year at the Bowl Media Day, which I think maybe Friday we'll get some answers from guys when we ask them directly about their plans for the Bowl. And if they're showing up the Bowl Media Day, it's a good indication that they're going to be ready to roll. But I remember Jair Brown being like, yeah, I'm in. And then Brenton Strange. And these were guys who were announcing, like, Juice Scruggs, they were announcing, I'm not in for 2024, but I'm in for the bowl game. And they went out. They all played well, and they all ended up in the 2nd round, I think, in the NFL draft this past spring. So those guys kind of came to mind here. Another answer that we got for 2024 and 2025, as it just so happens, Riley Thompson is staying in the fold for Penn State. And this is a huge deal because everything that we understood going into the season was that he was down to his last year of eligibility, despite last year being his first year in college football at Florida Atlantic, where he was really impressive as a quote unquote freshman. He did have a history internationally, Australian rules football. It's an international journey to get to this point. And so we didn't really sense a lot of optimism from Penn State's end, put it that way, that he was going to be able to stick around as their punter in 2024. That changed as the season wore on. And now, as it turns out, we learned he's good for 2024 and 2025. And he was, in fact, a freshman last year in the eyes of the NCAA. So sophomore Riley Thompson, no longer senior Riley Thompson, was your pick, Mark, as special teams MVP. And you had the first pick in the postseason. And he's got the numbers to back them up. If you don't have them in front of you, I can read some of them off.
I do.
Okay, well, I'll pass the baton to you because this is a significant deal for the 2024 Penn State team.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I went with him is because I felt terrible because he picked a wrong year to have a great year as a punter in the Big Ten. I mean, Torrey Taylor, the Ray Guy Award winner, you can't. I mean, he should have been first team, obviously, and then the guy from Michigan State and the guy from Indiana, I think both actually had better overall numbers. I'm not sure why the guy from Michigan edged him out on one of the teams. That didn't make sense to me, but I was under the impression that he could be done. And if he were done, his 45.4 yard average would be the 2nd best in school history. I mean, that's incredible for a career. We were thinking it was going to be a 1-year career, and now that it's spread out, but 1350 yards or longer, 16 down inside the 20. And a total of 85 return yards with none longer than 15, 4.7 yards per return. I mean, he was gigantic. And you pair him with that defense, and, I had to take another shot at them, for what they did in that Ohio State game by not having him punt, in the fourth quarter, and going for it on that ridiculous fourth and whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, this guy is a weapon. And, when we heard that Bacchetta was entering the transfer portal, I think some lights went off, and it's like, okay, well, because, you would think that he was probably, he had a very good shot at being a guy, and to be a scholarship punter, to walk away from that, I mean, that's big. I mean, there's no guarantee. I mean, I don't know that he's surfaced yet, but do you think it's a guarantee that kid's going to get a scholarship somewhere? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good part of it, but we got to be realistic. It wasn't like he was waiting in the wings. He wasn't standing as the understudy at every game.
Yeah.
He wasn't on the road. He 5 of the Penn State games this year, he wasn't even on the sideline for Penn State.
What I would say is that they also had Gabe Nwosu, who they were taking, who's perfectly capable of being a backup punter, and he's your primary kickoff guy. So those were, I would have been interested to see if there were a situation. I wouldn't have been interested to see. I didn't want to see it. That if Riley Thompson got banged up, I wonder what would have happened. Yeah. Let's put it that way. You guys know me. I never want to see anybody get hurt. But if Riley Thompson had been hurt, I wonder what would have happened. But my overall point is, when you see somebody walk away from a scholarship, I wonder if he knew at that point. And I think one of the good questions here is, was Riley Thompson on scholarship? We have to figure that out if he's going to be on scholarship at this point.
I believe our understanding was that he was on scholarship this year, whereas Alex Felkins was not.
Right. Okay.
I knew one coming from the FBS level, one coming from outside of it. But yeah, our understanding was on scholarship. He'll stay that way, certainly. Unfortunately, there is no more eligibility to squeeze out of the frame of Alex Felkins, who is moving on after the Peach Bowl.
Yeah, but overall, I mean, I just think this is I don't think you could understate how big this is for Penn State. Given, we'll see who their defensive coordinator is, but this is just another tool that they're going to have in that field position battle that they were so good at most of the time all year.
You go back to 2016, Blake Gillikin's freshman year. That's a lot of high-level punting that Penn State has experienced, and backing up what has been consistently an above-average defense and more so lately a great to elite defense here in Happy Valley. So when you've got that 12th man contributing at the punter role, that can really back you up. And it seems like Riley Thompson is going to be the player to do it in 2024, and if he chooses to do it in 2025. So cross that off the list of concerns. And I know there are plenty out there for Nittany Lions fans as they want to see this team assemble a college football playoff contender for 2024, but they've got a punter in place right now. Focusing on some players who are less obvious to be monitored here in the postseason. There's a few extra weeks of practice, and we always discuss the importance of trying to get to 6 wins for some of those struggling programs out there. It's not so much just to try to get to finish the season at 500 and to get to play in a bowl game. It's that you buy an extra month of cultivating your chemistry and cultivating the younger members of your roster. And that goes for even a 10-win team like Penn State. We just discussed a lot of the guys who are going to be moving on or maybe moving on. There are going to be holes to fill on this team when they return to the field for spring ball in 2024. And part of that plays into what we're discussing right now. Players to monitor on the practice field. We're going to go offense and we'll finish on defense. We should get looks at this team, a few of them in practice action starting this Friday and continuing all the way down to Atlanta. But we're not going to see a ton of it. So much of this will be development that occurs behind the scenes, and it might not come to fruition come Peach Bowl. But Mark, Daniel, and we'll begin here with Daniel on his first offensive pick. When it comes to guys that you think stand to gain a lot, maybe set themselves up for something next year here in the month of December, where does your head go?
I went with Andrew Rapplier, the freshman tight end, who we saw a little bit of over the course of the season. We already know Theo Johnson isn't going to be back next year. We're still waiting to hear what Tyler Warren's status is, but even if Warren were to come back, I think that Rapplier would be in a good position to compete with Khalil Dinkins to be that number 2 tight end, and we'll have to wait and see how Andy Kotelnicki is going to do things, but we've seen Penn State's willingness under James Franklin to play a lot of tight ends in different situations. So I think that Rappleyea is in a position to really take advantage of these practices, get a little bit of an increased workload, maybe get away from some of the scout team stuff that he was doing this season for a little bit, and put himself in position to kind of springboard into next year. There's going to be snaps available at tight end with Theo Johnson leaving. And I think that Andrew Rappleyea is someone that, people are excited about. We've heard a lot of good things about him from Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. And I think that he's the type of guy that next year could come in as a redshirt freshman, have a big role, and really add a different, or help replace that kind of physical, big-bodied receiver dimension that Theo Johnson was this year.
Mark, where does your focus go offensively?
I'm going to Drew Shelton. Kind of similar that a guy's going to go in the NFL draft, and who's next man up. And I wonder. I'd like to talk to Drew because, and hopefully we get an opportunity to at some point, because I think there were games where we barely saw him at all. There were games where he played quite a bit, but I just think they're going to need him to step up as just a consistent, one of those mainstays at offensive tackle. I mean, we still have to wait to see what Caden Wallace is going to do. I mean, he indicated that he wasn't positive how he was going to handle things, but regardless of what he does, I'll go out on a limb and say Olu's going to declare for the draft. And I think Drew Shelton, just to keep an eye on him. And then a couple of the other younger offensive linemen that I would throw in there are Jevin Williams and Donka. I mean, both of those guys, I think, have an opportunity to step up into bigger roles next year. And during the course of the season, we just didn't see a whole heck of a lot of them because they wanted to redshirt those guys. So it's whatever opportunities we get at practice, I think I'm going to be keeping my eyes on the O-line as much as possible, because I think, starting with Shelton and then some of those younger guys, let's see kind of where they are and, how they're playing. And, let's face it, if they do go with the Saquon, game plan for the bowl game, that's going to mean that if Olu decides to play, opts in, I guess you would call it, he's probably not going to be playing every snap, and that would mean more opportunities for Shelton and maybe Williams as kind of that third offensive tackle.
Jevin Williams, Anthony Donka both got in late against Michigan State. That was the third matchup for each of them on the season. And then two games went into the direction of Chimdi Ono, who was a late riser in the last cycle, really an impressive looking guy out there as a freshman at the tackle spot. And because of what the numbers look like at tackle, and discuss this with Tyler Calvaruso because of the transfer portal pickup earlier, I think you can kind of cast the net into all those guys, and also throw in the freshman Alex Birchmeyer, because it's only been scout team work for him. He's one of those guys that we're going to be really curious to get like the year one debriefing about, as a top 100 prospect that didn't see any game action this year while seemingly available. So a lot to work with on the offensive line. I went over to receiver because we just have so many questions about that room. And Omari Evans, because of the way he finished the regular season, I think it's just a natural answer for this question. I mean, he had, was it at 88 yards in the last couple of games. He had 6 yards or so in the rest of the entire season. Omari Evans has flashed his ability to go downfield, pulling the deep toss with Drew Aller. He's went for 28 yards a week prior to that. So I just want to know if he can build off of this. It seems like so much of what James Franklin has said publicly about this change at offensive coordinator and the way they've kind of maybe reevaluated their approach to certain positions and certain personnel decisions are the fact that Omari Evans is benefiting from it. So a lot of those things I'm reading, I'm thinking, well, Omari Evans, are they simplifying the process for him? Again, he didn't play wide receiver in high school. He shifted to that last year. He burned red shirt, and we thought he was due for a big year. But he's someone, I think, with this December of work, with what he's already starting to build with Drew Aller, there's a lot to be gained there, especially as you've got Andy Kotelnicki here taking notes, observing things practice by practice. I think consistency is going to be what you strive for. So much of what everyone wants to see from Omari Evans is going to be big play in Atlanta against Ole Miss. To me, I think the defining theme for whoever comes out of December feeling good about themselves in Marcus Hagan's room is going to be that they put together a few weeks of strong practice work under the eyes of their new offensive coordinator, under the eyes of their current wide receivers coach, and knowing that they're facing pressure because this staff is working to bring in replacement level players to that receiver room. So Omari Evans is where I go. Let's head over to defense and begin with you, Mark. What player stands out to you here in the month of December?
Yeah, I'm going with a little bit of a pattern here. So, I looked at that defensive end position. Chop Robinson's not going to be available. It would have been too easy to say deny Dennis Sutton, but we know about him. I mean, he was effectively playing starters minutes, even though he only really started when Chop was injured. So I'm taking one step below that and going with Zariah Fisher, who I think had quietly had a really nice year for them. 15 tackles, 2.5 sacks. 2.5 tackles for losses and a fumble recovery. And in those games where Chop wasn't available, I thought he stepped up and did some good things. So they're going to need more out of him next year. He was banged up. What was it, a couple years ago, and started looked better a little bit toward the end of last year, and now this year I think he had a full season of D end under his belt, and just looks more natural at the position. So I'm looking at Zerai, and I would also keep an eye. And I hope I'm not seeing anybody else's on Jameel Lyons at those positions as well. I like to throw out a couple people because, when you look at the trickle down effect, when a guy like Chop isn't going to be there, I think that could translate into more minutes for Jameel Lyons. And we look at that kid and just big and physical and tough. And, I think he has a gigantic upside. So both of those defensive ends, I was tempted to say Smith Vilbert, but I don't think he's going to make a surprise showing in this bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, Jameel Lyons, great point on him. He was came to mind for the second pick here as we were working through our players. So I'm glad you mentioned him. He started off his career in pads in August with a big month that put him on that radar to burn red shirt this year, even in a very talented room. If he can finish 2023 with another big month, I think Deion Barnes is going to absolutely love what he got from year one for a guy who didn't get to campus here until May. So good stuff. I'm going to go with another one of those freshmen and another one of those buzzy names that we heard back in preseason camp and even before then, Tony Rojas at linebacker, because you're nearing a new reality in that linebacker room. You're already there in one way because the voice who has been so prevalent there is moved on to Durham, North Carolina, Manny Diaz. This is a major piece of the comfort factor to this point for Tony Rojas and for Tamir Robinson and for Kavion Keys, the three freshman linebackers. This is who they were familiar with as the defensive coordinator and linebackers coach down the stretch of their recruitment on signing day, when they came with their families and moved to campus, and when they enjoyed, albeit as observers for the most part on defense, this elite season on that side of the football. And to this point, Tony Rojas, I got the numbers right here. He has played 102 total snaps on defense, and that's second among all freshmen in total snaps this year. Zion Tracy has 105. So we didn't see anyone get the kind of run, but you guys know it. I mean, whenever he was out there, you took notice of Rojas. And you'll go back to the blue-white game with that in April when he led all Nittany Lions and tackles out there and got some extended run. But the Maryland matchup, he was out there for about a half quarter. He forced 2 turnovers against the Terps. He had a tackle for loss in each of the last couple games. He popped up in the Delaware game with some run, and in the UMass game, looking like one of the best players on the field during the final stretch of those matchups. So to me, it doesn't look like this is a game against Ole Miss where he's going to get extensive run. You've got Abdul Carter, who's a sophomore, and you've got Kobe King, who's a redshirt sophomore. And so those guys are building their own careers up. And you've got Curtis Jacobs. Does he play fewer snaps? If he does, that's really going to impact Dom DeLuca, who's the primary backup there at Sam. So unless this turns into a blowout in favor of Penn State, you're probably going to see Rojas mainly on special teams. But I think because of how this shapes up with a new leader coming in at linebackers coach and defensive coordinator, and what we're about to see turn the page defensively with some big-time performers leaving, to me, he can be a major component of this defense and what it can accomplish next September as a sophomore. And this is a bit of that proving ground as he kind of has to grow up and deal with the not so lovely part of college football life, which is that your mentor isn't guaranteed to be around really beyond your first year on campus. Daniel, what do you have for us on the defensive side of things?
I stayed in that linebacker room and I went a little bit deeper down the depth chart. I went with Kavion Keys. He's someone that I think we heard some good things about over the course of the season. I think including from James Franklin, maybe. I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
He appeared.
He went public, yeah.
Yeah, he appeared in 2 games, played 7 snaps. And then when Penn State announced its end of season awards on Sunday, he was the developmental squad special teams player of the year. And he was one of 2 developmental squad defensive players of the year. He shared that with Jake Wilson. So I think that that's kind of a sign that, how Penn State thinks of Keys, especially behind the scenes, the work that he's been putting in practice. And I think that if you do those things behind the scenes, you can get your chances on, with the varsity. I guess, given how crowded this linebacker room is right now, and given that pretty much, as far as we know, everyone will be available for the Peach Bowl, it's hard to see too many avenues for playing time for Kavion Keys. But I think when you look at opportunities on special teams, the staff not really having to worry about saving that red shirt or something, looking for opportunities to get him onto the field. I think that he is someone who could have an opportunity. And I think beyond that, he's someone that, is just going to benefit from this extra playing time. I think he's someone that is worth, checking in with some of the older players on both sides of the ball to get their impressions on what he's done this year, how he's come along. But I think looking at things, it is a crowded position. But I think given what we've heard and kind of seen, I think that Kavion Keys is someone to keep an eye on over the course of this process. And then overall, I mean, I was telling you guys when we were making these picks, there's so many different directions that you can go with this defense. And I think that, even if guys opt out, even if they have a full deck, there's going to be a lot of intriguing guys to get eyes on who could potentially make impacts.
As you can tell, there's plenty to discuss this time of year across college football. We'll keep doing that at lions247.com. We'll be back with another episode of this podcast. And then on Friday, which will be beyond the next episode of this podcast, make sure you check out lions247.com Friday and into the weekend for our coverage of this Peach Bowl Media Day at Beaver Stadium. It's our first opportunity to hear from the new offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki. Perhaps we'll get some news on what the plan is at defensive coordinator for the Peach Bowl if we find something out in the interim from James Franklin and company. And then we're expecting a dozen plus players to be available from the Penn State roster. And that's going to include some guys that we still have questions about when it comes to this bowl game and maybe 2024. And we might not get all the answers, but we'll try our hardest. We'll let you know what's going on at lions247.com. Mark, Daniel, we're going to get to hoops next episode because they don't play before Saturday, and they're coming off a big win and they're at 10 games. And so just a bit of a teaser for the basketball portion of our listeners out there. We will talk basketball next time. Appreciate you both.
Cool.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right. Big thanks to Mark and Daniel, and of course, Tyler Calvaruso before them, who covers recruiting and the transfer portal for us at lions247.com. We'll be back again with our second episode of the week on Thursday. As I said, we'll dive into a bit of hoops talk. We'll have more to talk about in the transfer portal, I believe, by then as well. And additionally, the recruiting trail continues towards signing period, which is next week. And we've got this Peach Bowl to gear up towards. Again, practice availability coming our way on Friday. It'll be our first look at this team in action since Black Friday victory over Michigan State. Stepping aside for now and getting back to work over at the site, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for tuning in to the Lions 24/7 podcast.